Hello and welcome. I'm going to teach you the 5 rules to moving bishops, and then after that I'm going to show you some strategies to hopefully help win the game with bishops. So let's get started. First of all, these are the bishops. Each player starts with 2 bishops. All right, and rule number 1 is that bishops move diagonally only. So if it's white's turn and they move the G pawn out of the way so they can get their bishop out early in the game, white could then go to G2. If black decides to move their queen pawn, for example, just to get some pawns in motion, open up squares for the bishop, now it's white's turn. Now, this takes us to number 2. Bishops can move any number of squares in a diagonal line. So it doesn't just have to go one square at a time. The bishop can move a pretty good distance. Bishops cannot jump over other pieces. Their movement is blocked by any piece in their path. It's pretty straightforward. If the knight's sitting here, the bishop cannot go to e4 until that knight has moved out of the way, and so on. Number 4. Bishops can capture an opponent's piece if it is either next to them diagonally or across the board. So in this case, if white didn't move the knight in the way, this bishop could go all the way to b7. If this b7 pawn were not in the way, it could go to a8. So a lot of games, especially in the beginning stages of learning chess, players might accidentally move this b pawn, which creates a problem for black as that bishop is now ready to take the rook. Even if the bishop were captured by the queen later in the game, you still lost a rook, which is better in value than a bishop. Number 5, and this sort of goes without saying, but it's important to know this and think about it throughout the game, is that you basically have a dark squared bishop and a light squared bishop, and it doesn't change. So when the bishop starts on f1, now even if your chessboard is blue and white or red and black or whatever color, the bottom line is your bishop stays on the same color it starts on. So as you can see, if this light squared bishop were ended up on a dark square, somebody moved illegally. So a light squared bishop could not end up on a dark square, or it wouldn't be diagonal. And I hope I don't beat a dead horse there, but it's important. When you're looking at later at the structure of the pawns on the board, and you're trying to assess, do I want to trade this bishop for a knight? What does the pawn structure look like? Are all the pawns blocking the bishop's ability to be useful? Maybe in that case, you don't need the bishop as bad as you'd rather capture the opponent's knight. And some of that gets a little too advanced, so I'm going to keep it simple. Just remember to pay attention to light squares and dark squares throughout the game, whether it's pawns or bishops that you're talking about especially. Okay, now that we have covered the 5 rules of bishops, I'm going to cover 5 strategies with using bishops. Strategy number 1 is to control the long diagonal. So this may not always mean you're looking to get a bishop on G2 or B2 right away and try to get these big diagonals, because your opponent can kind of block with pawns and so forth. But throughout the game, you want to try to build around the way that the opponent's moving their pawns, and you want to build in a manner that gives your bishops the most access to the board, whether it's from G2 to A8 or whether it's from D3 to H7. I mean, it's always going to be different because you're playing around pieces, but the bottom line is you want those long diagonals because that's what's going to make the bishop most valuable in the game. Let's go to number 2. All right, this strategy is called keeping a pair of bishops. They're very, very powerful together. Now, if you had to choose between a knight and a bishop, or instead having 2 bishops and no knight, you generally will want 2 bishops. And this will matter a lot because you'll have lots of opportunities to make trades, and you want to assess this. It's not always the case, but pay attention to what you got, the pawn structure, what's on the board, and work on this. Here's an example. If it's white's turn to move, you can actually trap that rook. It has nowhere to go without being potentially lost for a bishop, which means you can take a 5-point piece and only lose a 3-point piece. And that's one small example of why a pair of bishops is so powerful. If you just have one, you can't really corner a piece. You can't corner the king. You can't corner a queen as easily. But, keep that in mind. That is so important. All right, this next one is about keeping open diagonals for your bishop. It's much, much better if your bishop has places to go. Obviously, most people know that, but imagine also being able to land a knight on a certain square only because your bishop is also covering that square. So it's not just to give the bishop more places to go, it's to give the bishop places to help strategize other pieces, and you can harmonize all of your bishops and rooks and knights in a manner that gives you strategies they can't break through. Check this out. We have a bishop on b1, and now this looks extreme, but you'd be surprised how often a piece gets trapped just throughout trades that happen and throughout playing strong opponents. So in this situation, maybe the bishop started over here, pointed at the king to go for a quick checkmate or something, ended up getting pushed back by pawns, and eventually had to move this pawn for some reason, right? It doesn't really matter how it got there, but the point is I want you to see that this bishop is obviously in a bad place, and to fix it would have to move multiple pieces and times to get it active. And even if you did that, now this bishop might be another problem. You can't go to an active square because this bishop would simply capture. So keep your pieces more like this one. It's got it's got all kinds of options on where to go, forward, backward, sideways, you name it. And that means, many more options for tactics. And tactics are something you're going to learn if you haven't to be able to actually make profitable trades. And let's move on to the next one. Okay, this one is using bishops for pins and skewers. Now, a pin, simply put, is this bishop pointing at the king, and the rook is stuck there because if the rook were to move, it would be in check. The king would be in check. So the rook is basically stuck, which means you are either holding it hostage until you can make an even better trade. For example, if you were able to get a rook right here, now your pin is even more powerful because not only are you looking to profit off of a bishop versus a rook, but now you have two pieces against one, and a king is basically the only one there to defend itself. So pins are very powerful. Another way to use a bishop is a skewer, and that's actually pretty similar, but it's just sort of the opposite of a pin. All right, in this example, a skewer, which is basically the opposite of a pin, where the most valuable piece is not being directly attacked, but it's a piece in between, which is under threat. With a skewer, the most valuable piece is directly being attacked, and when it goes to get out of the way of the attack, for example, queen moves here, now the bishop can still take a piece and profit, but it's not as valuable as the queen. That's a skewer. Now, this bishop strategy is extremely important to know. The next one is called fianchetto your bishop. This is a powerful tool where your bishop goes g2 or even over here on b2, and you're giving it a strong diagonal. Now, a lot of times it's paired with castling. Now you have this incredible, strong defense here by your king. You also have a tactic. Let's just show you an extreme example. In this situation, if it's white's turn, the knight can move to put the king in check, which now gives this bishop access to steal this rook on the other side. So you might lose your knight right here, but look what you gain in exchange. This is a nice, powerful example of fianchettoing your bishop.